If Israel's response, which wasn't really a response, was justified, then a 1-year-old baby who was killed in it was responsible for the killings. A pregnant woman who was injured badly in their response was responsible for the Eilat attacks. Somehow an electrical plant which supplies power throughout Gaza, which they destroyed, had something to do with these attacks, and a cement factory which provides cement so the people in Gaza can rebuild houses that Israel already destroyed was responsible. What we're seeing is another assault on the civilian infrastructure and the civilians of Gaza, which is completely deliberate. In fact, Netanyahu has said that after we've taken out the terrorist leadership which was responsible for these attacks, we're not going to stop. And there's talk now that they're even going to go in by ground. Now, first of all, who is responsible for the attacks? We don't know. At first they blamed the Popular Resistance Committees of Gaza, which has denied it. And so they've attacked them and their camps. Now I'm hearing that I've seen Israeli analysts blame Hezbollah, which is completely implausible because they somehow have a relationship with the Popular Resistance Committees. Then I heard on Israel radio yesterday that Al-Qaeda was responsible, which is absolutely implausible.
But in a way, does it matter who's for the Israeli establishment? Does it matter who is responsible, or will they attack anyway?
No, I mean, if Popeye and Olive Oil were Islamists, they would be fair game as well. And I mean, I don't understand their logic. Mark Regev, the Israeli flak, laid out the logic pretty clearly when he said, we don't care if Hamas is responsible. Hamas is the government in charge of Gaza, and we're going to target them and their infrastructure. This is just another attempt to remove Hamas and place another government in power that is complacent and subservient to the demands of Israel, which is that Gaza remain under siege and cut off from the outside world, and it's not going to happen. So, you know, the assault of Gaza's civilian population goes on, and this is part of Israeli military doctrine. You have to just look at the doctrine that the IDF operates under, which was written by Asa Kasher, the Tel Aviv University philosopher, and he calls himself a practical ethicist, and Amos Yadlin, the former IDF captain who headed Israel's military intelligence, where they openly justify attacks on civilian targets as long as there are military targets in the area. This was expressed most directly through the Dahiyya doctrine, where after flattening the Dahiyya quarter of Beirut, the Israeli army's northern commander, Gadi Eisenkot, said, in the next war, every Lebanese citizen is Nasrallah, and every resident of Gaza is Hamas. Essentially, we will apply state terror as a deterrent tactic. So what does this do to Israel on the other side? What happened in Eilat? I'm not going to introduce any theories about who was responsible. Let's just talk about what happened. A bus, first of all, an Israeli military patrol was attacked. Attacking a military patrol is an act of war. It's not an act of terror. But a bus was attacked, which contained civilians and soldiers. The soldiers immediately began firing back. Many of the casualties were soldiers. And Asa Kasher, who devised Israeli military doctrine, says Israeli soldiers are in fact civilians because it's a civilian army. Therefore, when you kill our soldiers, you attack our civilians. So they've blurred the line between civilian and soldier. Therefore, in a sick way, they've made Israeli civilians more vulnerable, just as they've done to the people of Gaza and Lebanon. I frequently, when I was in Tel Aviv, would eat lunch at the Zionist Organization of America's in-house cafe. It's just really good food and it's really cheap. And I mean, everything there is the Zionist organization, so it's not like I'm like doing BDS any favors by being there. And everyone around me were Shabakniks and top military commanders who worked at Hakirya, the defense ministry, which is right nearby. According to Asa Kasher and Amos Yadlin's rules, attacking that cafe is fair unless you say that these rules only apply to Israel. This is the danger of their doctrine of asymmetrical warfare. It puts everyone in danger by destroying international law, specifically the Fourth Geneva Conventions, which forbids attacks on civilians. They've authorized attacks on civilians as Israeli military doctrine, and what's more, they've said that they're going to promote it, and they've successfully promoted it to the United States. As Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reisner, who's the former head of the Israeli Army's legal division, said, international law progresses through violations. In other words, the more violations we commit, the more the world will have to adapt itself to us by changing their own doctrine. This puts everyone at risk. I mean, we have to go back to the Nuremberg trials when these war criminals were put on trial, not necessarily for genocide, but for war crimes, because war crimes established the pretext for genocide. What they were trying to do was lay a foundation for international law, which then flowed effortlessly into the Fourth Geneva Conventions, which Israel is attempting to break down, that prevented the complete chaotic collapse of our civilization, which allowed for human survival, because they knew, after looking at what happened in World War II, that after the great powers start to feast on the weak within their own countries and in other countries, they start to attack each other, and the whole world is thrown into chaos. And so this thin but I think really effective and noble structure of international law is just being eaten away each time Israel practices its tactics of asymmetrical warfare on Gaza. That's what this is about. That's what the siege of Gaza is about. It's about going beyond the threshold of what should be acceptable to human values and to our recipe for surviving as a civilization. And we have so it goes beyond, was it justified? Who's responsible? It can never be justified because the structure itself affects us all and is damaging to Israelis and Palestinians. I think everyone should have the right to be a civilian and enjoy certain protections.